Snow is melting and trout are getting stocked, which can only mean one thing. It's early spring trout fishing, baby. Oh! What is up, Outdoor Mavericks? Welcome back to the channel and the latest trout fishing tips tutorial on the channel, where we're going to talk about early spring trout fishing tips today. Now, spring is one of my favorite times of the year to go trout fishing, especially the early spring time frame when you get more aggressive trout and places are getting stocked with a lot of rainbows. Now, early spring trout fishing can be a lot of fun, but it can also be challenging when you're coming off late winter trout fishing techniques and maybe the waters haven't warmed up or you're still fishing winter tactics. So to help you catch more trout in the early springtime, let's go through the top 10 tips. Now, tip number 10 is to work with moving baits, and we're talking spinners, plugs, and crankbaits, stuff that's moving around, getting the trout's attention when they start getting more aggressive as the waters start to warm up. As the transition from winter into spring fishing happens, you're going to get trout that are going to be less lethargic and more aggressive as the waters start to warm up. And this is the perfect time to utilize and start perfecting moving baits, especially my favorite, which are spinners. And rooster tail spinners in the springtime, as well as the panther martin, are two of my favorite to target trout in any body of water, especially when the trout are being super aggressive. And if your goal is to go after a big trout, especially in that early spring time frame, grab yourself a spinner, cast it out, and get ready for a big takedown. Now, tip number 9 is something both fly fishermen as well as bait anglers need to pay attention to, which is to watch for the early season bug hatch. Now, depending on where you live in the country, you could be still utilizing winter trout fishing tactics. You could still be ice fishing, but part of the country could be in that early springtime when the bug hatches start to happen and trout are hitting the top water and feeding on a lot of those early bugs. So as you head to the water, pay attention to see if there's a bug hatch happening, and if so, grab your flies and get ready for an epic day. And if you're bait fishing, use that nymph power bait as something off the bottom or underneath the bobber, and that can be deadly effective when you're seeing that early hatch happen. And when the flies are out, hopefully you're getting a lot of big bites on the top water instead of a lot of flies in your mouth. Don't ask me how I know. Now, tip number 8 is to fish late and fish later, and especially with daylight savings time around the corner and the days extending into longer with more sunlight, it's going to give you a chance to fish longer in the day and those longer, warmer periods of the day, which is 11 o'clock all the way to sunset. And the more sunlight and the longer days is going to give you an advantage because it's going to allow the sun to warm up the water a degree or two more in the afternoon and get those trout to bite. Now, with longer days comes more sun, which means the water's going to have a better chance to warm up in that afternoon time frame and give you a chance to fish later in the day and find some bites and find the water that is the most warm on the body of water that you're fishing. Now, tip number 7 is to play with the depth that you're fishing your bait or your gear. And in the early springtime, the trout are going to spread out as the warmer starts to warm up. You're going to have some trout near the bank, some trout in the middle tier of the water, and some that are going to go a little bit deeper depending on the body of water that you're fishing. And because of that, you want to move your gear around to different depths of the water that you're fishing, whether it's a river, a creek, a stream, a lake, or a pond, to figure out if there's a specific zone in the water that the trout are hanging in and absolutely crushing the bait. And once you find that zone, stay in that zone and use the same size bait, whether it's a little bit bigger or a little bit of a smaller bait, because in early spring trout fishing, the bait size does matter. Now, tip number 6 is to mix and change baits very often. And this is something that you have to just get accustomed to in the early springtime, because there's still going to be winter fishing tactics that you're going to have to apply. The waters could still be a little bit cooler, so you want to play around, try different baits, try different scents, try different styles to figure out what the trout may be honing in on and going after for that day in particular. Some days it could be corn baits, some days it could be straight up night crawlers or crawdads that are coming out of the mud which the trout are feeding on. And some days it could be any type of bait, or it's a specific bait and a color that they're targeting. So you want to have a game plan going in, choose something to start out, and if you're not getting bites, change that up every 20 to 30 minutes, play around with different baits to find what the trout like. So before you head out, make sure you got the tackle box prepped and packed with every single bait, because some days you might have to go through the entire tackle box to get a couple bites. Now, tip number 5 is something most states have and provide to the public, which is a stocking schedule. So tip number 5 is to pay attention and see what the trout stocking schedule is to plan your days out fishing or your trips out with your family. Now, having a stocking schedule that you can reference is super helpful to know when your favorite body of water is getting stocked with trout. But when it comes to the stocking schedule, there's 2 approaches. You could go the day that's getting stocked and be the first person there before light up to make sure that you're getting on that early stocked bite. But my personal preference is actually to wait a couple days after a place has been stocked, maybe it's been fished out a little bit, to avoid the crowds, and then I'll go fish that area. As you build confidence in catching trout, you less are reliant on the stocking schedule and more use more tactical information around weather, water conditions, and baits to catch those fish. But if you're new into trout fishing or someone who just loves to catch a lot of trout, the stocking schedule is perfect so you can time up your trips, hit the water, and get on some really epic bites. Now, tip number 4 is to find grass and cover, and especially with the snow melt off and rivers and creeks and streams and bodies of water that are on the rise, you're going to find trout in more common areas around grass and structure where they can get out of that fast flowing water into slower moving water, but also areas of high oxygen and areas where there's a lot of food. And grass and cover and structure give that to the trout, especially in that transition from the winter time into the early spring fishing tactics. Now, something that my grandfather told me a long time ago when you're fishing around grass and structure is if you're not losing gear, you ain't fishing. Now, tip number 3 is to add scent to your baits more frequently, and this really depends on the temperature of the water that you're fishing. In the winter time, you can get away with adding scent every 45 minutes because the scent lasts longer in cooler water. In warmer water, or the water is warming up like in the early spring time frame, you want to add scent more frequently because when it's warmer, the scent is going to dissolve a lot quicker in the water off your bait. So my personal preference is to add scent every 30 to 40 minutes depending on the temperature of the water. Now, when it comes to my favorite scents in the springtime, crawfish, corn, cheese, garlic, and aniseed are 5 of my favorites to use on a day in, day out basis. Now, that's not to say there's other scents out there that you can't utilize to catch trout, but those are my 5 common and favorite ones to fish that I'm most consistent on in the early spring time frame. And when you're packing a lot of scent in your tackle box, especially in the springtime, be very careful putting it away and not setting it right on top of that hook on your spinner, or there's going to be scent flowing everywhere in your tackle box. Don't ask me how I know. Now, tip number 2 is to pay very close attention to the snowmelts, and this is going to impact a few areas of the body of water that you're fishing. It's most likely that the water is going to go up, which on the rise is harder to fish. Now, with rising waters, you're also going to have different structures and different flows, which means the trout are going to hang out in different areas because of the changing height of the water. You're most likely going to have off water and dirty conditions, so pay very close attention to this because that could change the tactics, the baits, and how you fish for that day on that body of water. Now, if you're fishing an area that has snow on the bank still or has some icy areas, be very careful because it's very easy to slip and go right into the water head first. Now, we've gone through tips 10 through 2, so what's tip number 1? Well, that's going to be to pay very close attention to the water temperature. Now, water temperature plays a critical role in early spring trout fishing. As the trout get more aggressive, they're going to go towards those warmer pockets of water or areas on the body of water that you're fishing. So your highest percentage chance to get a hookup is going to be on those areas where the sun is hitting the water and the areas of the body of water that are going gonna warm up first. And in some bodies of water, the area or the bite window for the day could be this small, and it could be in one particular area where the trout are absolutely going insane and biting anything. So my biggest tip is when you're gonna fish a body of water, think about where the sun's gonna hit the water first, what temperature the water currently is when you get there, and finding the areas where the water's gonna warm up first. And once you find that particular spot, you're gonna have an epic day full of stories and full of big trout catches. And there you guys have it, the top 10 early spring trout fishing tips. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video and got some information to take from this video out into the field the next time you go out to catch a ton of trout in the early springtime. So thank you guys for watching today's video. Smash the thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and as always you guys, the outdoors is a gift, share it with others.